everyone, welcome to Colleptic videos. Today I have a sword review for you here, and this will be a really interesting one because it is not a widely known sword type or company worldwide who makes this weapon. So stick around and I'll give you some basic information about the weapon, the manufacturer, and its strengths and its weaknesses. Alrighty then, first off, this sword is produced by Darksword Armory out of St. Laurent, Quebec. I'm in British Columbia, Vancouver, British Columbia, so that's way across 3,000 kilometers across the country. That's quite a ways away from me. This company is, in the whole grand scheme of people who produce swords, not the most widely known company out there, but they do produce weapons for some Hollywood blockbusters out there, some documentary films, and theatrical groups. So they do actually produce a wide variety of weapons and other things on their websites, which are utilized in, you know, as I mentioned, movies and documentaries. So they do know what they're doing. If you go to their website, the website is relatively nicely laid out. And if you search this sword specifically, and why this one will be unique for a review, because not too many people will or maybe ever will review this sword. This is, and forgive my pronunciation here, this is the Viscount or the Viscount sword. So the other thing to note about their website, a lot of their weapons are reproductions and not necessarily fantasy-based swords or interpretation of swords. They do have some stuff on their website that are fantasy swords, so they have swords from Lord of the Rings and that sort of thing on there, so you can get those, but a lot of their swords are reproductions of historical weapons to the best of their ability with modern standards, of course. So as I mentioned, this is the Viscount sword on there. This sword is 5160 carbon steel. A little disclaimer I'd like to make is I bought this one quite a few years ago. They have since started using, to my understanding from having followed postings on their Facebook and their website, they're now using a different sort of steel, different manufacturing process. So this review of the weapon and its quality may not be 100% what you're going to get if you get their newer weapons or their newer blades on their swords. That I cannot speak to because I only own one, and I think I ordered this, oh geez, 3-4 years ago now. As I mentioned, this sword is 5160 high carbon steel. If you go to their website, they've got all sorts of different blades depending on the weapon you're ordering. Some have larger fullers, some have more of the diamond style blade, some have half fullers plus a diamond style. Some blades are longer. When I ordered the sword, I asked for one of the fastest, most agile weapons they have, and they recommended this one to me. This sword only weighs 2.4 pounds, which is very light for a longsword. That's partly due to its dimensions and its blade design. It is 42 inches long. The blade is only about 31 inches long. The blade on this weapon, as you can see here, is very flexible, which is a little bit rare for a lot of the long swords I've used, and I'll get a little bit more into that when I talk about how it handles and its durability. When I ordered the sword, I was impressed with its overall quality for its price point. So if you compare this to higher end weapons, this is somewhere right in the middle. So on their website right now, it's listed at about $420. I think if you get the Scabbard and get it sharpened, that sort of thing, it'll be a little over $500 before shipping. That's somewhere right in the middle. And when you start comparing this to swords around that price, it's right on point with them when it comes to quality. The leather choice is, once again, somewhere in the middle. It's very attractive the way they put this extra wrap on here. This isn't a high use weapon. It's mainly was bought for cutting practice and actually test it out and see how it was, if anything. So I think if I use this more often, a lot of this leather would actually start coming off the handle, this design element on it. Whereas everything else is put together quite well. The pommel itself, as you can see, is peened. That has not come loose at all. The hilt started to get a little bit rattly, I think, after my first use. So that I could recommend they could figure out a better way to put this on. With that being said, this sword I bought about 3-4 years ago now, and according to their Facebook updates and their website, they now use different steel and different manufacturing techniques, so I don't think it would be fair to say if I ordered another version of the sword, it would be exactly the same. You need to note that they actually hand make all their swords. They do not prefab anything, and they do not order things in. These are actually traditionally made in Quebec, Canada, which is a rare thing these days to find someone who is actually building weapons as they were made traditionally in the past. So I mentioned this weapon came with a scabbard. You can order it either as just the weapon itself or with a scabbard. The scabbard itself is very light duty. It almost weighs nothing. The leather and all the stitching on it is pretty decent quality. Nothing's come loose on it. I will say I think this wouldn't last very long, in an outdoor environment. And the inside looks like it's MDF wood. I can't quite tell, but nevertheless, it's light. It comes with a scabbard. It comes with a belt already attached to it. So I can recommend getting the scabbard to keep your sword safe, and it also looks pretty darn cool. All right, as I already mentioned, this is a very light and agile weapon. That's primarily due to the way it was manufactured and the overall dimensions. Plus, if you notice, the blade is very thin, and that's from its thickest point to where it tapers down to for its edge. There isn't much difference, and when you get to the area of the blade that you'll want to cut with, it actually becomes very knife-like. So this weapon in general cut through anything I actually threw at it like it was butter. And in fact, it was because it was so flexible compared to a lot of long swords, which I now own, it actually taught me edge alignment much better than most weapons could, because you can feel this weapon flex through the air even just when you swing it. You can also feel the way the blade moves and what your edge alignment is through everything you cut through. So as I mentioned, I have done a lot of practice cutting with this weapon, primarily through lighter objects. And due to the way it holds an edge, because it's harder steel, it was difficult to sharpen, but it cut very well. The main area of concern with this weapon, and I don't know if this translates to all of their weapons or their newer types of steels they use and their newer processes they use to forge their weapons, and that's an important thing to note, is that they do hand forge their weapons. These aren't generic blades that are bought from somewhere else and then they just make the sword. They actually hand make all of their weapons in Quebec, Canada, which is a very cool thing. The problems I found was when I started cutting heavier objects with this, primarily the standard mats that everyone used to cut and test weapons on. If you look here, the weapon is now bent here at the crossguard. So it shoots off in this direction, and you can see the handle shoots off in this direction. This was a result of just cutting through mats, and I'd actually only cut through a couple mats before this actually happened. And it's difficult for me to give this sword a really good review as a battle-ready sword that it's listed as when you cut through a few solid objects, which aren't that difficult to cut through for most swords these days, and it bends at the handle. So whether that's a flaw of this one in particular, or whether it's something they've corrected on their newer weapons, that's something I can't comment on, because I would need to test at least 5 or 6 of various different types of their weapons in order to actually make a solid conclusion on that. One of the problems is that a lot of people don't do tests of their swords online, therefore you don't get a large group of people giving feedback on their weapons. So once again, that's a difficult thing to assess and judge. All right, regarding the price of this weapon, it's right in the middle. So if you go to various websites like Cult of Athena, you'll notice there are some cheaper weapons, which are $150 to $300, and then you have the weapons that are around the $500 range. Then you have the better stuff like Albion and whatnot, which will be well over $1,000. This sits itself right in the middle. This sword in particular was $420 Canadian before shipping, and I think with the scabbard and everything, it's slightly over $500. Overall, this weapon, I believe its blade, its handle, its pommel, its handling, the way it holds an edge, the way it cuts, the way it behaves functionally, it's definitely a $500 weapon. Where it could use some improvements, which they may have addressed on their newer lines of weapons and steel and manufacturing, is they may have improved some of the fit and finish of the crossguard and maybe the handle, but that I can't say until I would see more of their weapons. The biggest complaint about the weapon was the fact that it bent, which for a mid-range weapon should not happen. A $500 sword should not bend when cutting through a mat. I don't know whether that's a flaw of this weapon in particular, or whether they've addressed these things, or whether, like I say, it was a fluke and this weapon just happened to bend that way. So it might be surprising to you that this Viscount sword from Darksword Armory, despite the fact that it bent and I can no longer use it for cutting, is still the most favorite weapon or longsword that I've ever purchased. The overall look of the sword, that it's a historical reproduction, that it's actually hand forged, the weight of it, the way it handles, the way it cuts through the air, the way the blade cuts through an object forces you to become a better cutter. A heavier object, you can just power through the object you're going to cut through. This weapon, you need to have proper edge alignment. If this sword didn't bend, this might be the only sword that I actually own that would have had a 10 out of 10 score to this date. The fact that it bent and the fact that the crossguard came loose does lower the quality score. But Darksword Armory, I can still highly recommend ordering a sword from them. Even though this was years ago when I purchased this sword, they were easy to order from. Their website is good. Their shipping was fast. What I ordered is what I got. For those reasons, I can still highly recommend using Darksword Armory. I would personally love to test more of their swords due to the fact that there aren't that many reviews of their swords out there. There aren't that many peer reviews out there. And I believe the more reviews you get of weapons for a manufacturer, the better their weapons will become. They are constantly updating the type of steel they use, how they forge things, how they make their weapons. So I'd actually like to do a comparison of a weapon from 3-4 years ago to a weapon that they actually have now. What changes have they made? How do they handle differently? Will they bend? These are important things for a actual functional weapon, that you need to be able to cut through simple things like mats without a weapon bending. That is a standard of the business now in order to be able to do that. So thanks for watching. I hope you liked the review of this sword. Maybe in the future I'll have more Darksword Armory weapons to review. So until then, please subscribe and have a nice day or evening. Thank you.